Hi and welcome to Conversations with Robyn. On today's program we have Dr. Joe Dispenza, and many of you may know Joe by the doco-drama What the Bleep Do You Know? Welcome to the program, Joe.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Robyn.
Thank you so much for including us as part of your tour in Australia.
Thank you.
If I was going to introduce you, the broader version, what would I be saying?
Well, I think most people know me from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? I think it was a good beginning for people to begin to examine the nature of reality, examine the idea of how they fit into their life and what the idea of change is all about. Mm-hmm. I have a background in neuroscience. I have a degree in chiropractic. I have a background in biochemistry. And I pretty much lecture now teaching people about the biology of change, what neuroscience has to say about the potential for people to change their mind and what it does, not only to their bodies, but ultimately in their lives.
Okay. And you're just finishing your tour in Australia. Mm-hmm. Where did you visit?
Well, we started off in Perth. We did a seminar and workshop there. Then we went to Brisbane, then to Melbourne, and finished in Sydney.
Okay. And what's the feedback you've been getting from Australians?
I think for the most part, as I said in my talk in Sydney yesterday, in Australia there's a great balance between head and heart. I think most people want to understand philosophically information and then get about finding out the practical applications. And I think when we begin to apply what we learn, I think when we have the opportunity to demonstrate it, I think that people are more empowered. And it was pretty much well received amongst everybody, because if science says something is possible, then it gives us permission to accept a little bit more about our potential and a little bit more about our own personal greatness. So I think my message is to inspire people, and I think in Australia it was really well received, and I actually enjoyed myself quite a bit.
Well, I was at your workshop in Sydney yesterday, and I think the one thing that really impressed me, inverted commas, was how simplistic your message is. I mean, it's in one way it's a very intense subject, but you seem to have the knack of making it so understandable and achievable.
Well, I think that everybody wants to understand things in its most simplistic form. I think that I spend a lot of time reading boring research articles that nobody really cares to read, and I look for one gem or one jewel out of that article that I think, for me, I want to know how to apply it. I want to know how we can take the next step to begin to make personal changes, not only within ourselves, but within our lives. And I think all great truths come down to a very simple understanding. I think that we have to reach sometimes to be able to understand it or run it through our own personal neurological processes to find solutions. But I think people meet truth on their own level, and for me, I always want to refine it to the most simplest message, because people can remember a simple message, and then depending on where the person's at in terms of their mind, some people like to understand the science behind it. Mm-hmm. Other people like to relate or allegorically to the cultural or religious, associations. But simple truths seem to sustain the measure of time.
Okay, and that's part of what your book's about, also, isn't it?
Well, the book's about the science of changing your mind, and I think that, the original manuscript was 1,000 pages long, and I kept telling my publisher, this is 2 books, and they wanted me to do it in one. So, it's a little bit technical in certain parts, but, if you understand what science has to say about what's called neuroplasticity, our ability to upscale the hardware in our brain and to change, and not only change the hardware but the software, I think that people have hope. And I think that when we have hope, we have another day to live.
Okay. How would you then start to explain, in the simplistic language that is understandable, of what it all means about the science of changing your mind.
Well, you were at the workshop
Don't ask
yesterday.
me to explain it.
What did you get from it?
Okay, what I got from it was, and for me, it's very much about visualising that when we do something constantly, a habit, it forms a certain pathway in our brain. And then as we start to recognise that this is what we're doing, and the fact that our body then takes that on board and almost becomes the driver, we actually have another way that we can start retraining and doing new pathways. And as the new pathways happen, the old ones let go.
That's exactly the truth. That in fact, that most people, with the habit, in a habit, the body becomes the mind. If we repeat the same thoughts and the same actions over and over again, the law in neuroscience is a concept called Hebbian Learning, which says nerve cells that fire together wire together. And if we keep the same thoughts going and we keep performing the same actions, we hardwire our brain into very, very predictable patterns. That is the box of the brain. The box of the brain is the most commonly fired, most neurologically set of circuits that we continuously attend to. And so then to change then is to break the habit of being ourselves. And we have to begin by making that change by learning new information, by learning knowledge. Knowledge is what forces the brain to fire in new patterns and new sequences. Once we learn something new, we make a new connection or we make a new circuit. If we just learn something new, we're already beginning to change the mind. If we can remember it, we can maintain or sustain those connections. But that's not enough, because that's just philosophy, that's just intellectual jargon. We can store that in the thinking part of our brain, but the true maverick, the true individual, takes that knowledge and personalizes it, applies it, demonstrates it. And when we apply knowledge and we personalize it, we have a new experience. An experience is when we teach the body, sensory-wise, what the mind has learned. And so most people get in the habit of being themselves by the time they're 35 years old. The personality is pretty much a finite set of neurological circuits, and if we repeat an action enough times, we can train the body to remember as well as the mind. And we have enough of those automatic programs that ultimately create a finite individual with a set of predispositions that keep us doing the same things and thinking the same ways and expecting a different result. I think when we reach that point, we're headed for our genetic destiny. And so the book is about, and the workshop is about, going from thinking to doing to being, to become conscious of those unconscious programs and begin to look at them under a microscope so that we can then gain conscious control over something that was once unconscious. Given that, we understand that if we can inhibit or stop certain thought processes or certain actions, the universal law says you don't use it, you lose it. Nerve cells that no longer fire together, they no longer wire together. And it gives people the understanding how they can change the mind. And the mind basically is the brain in action or the brain at work. So if you learn new things, you apply it, you force the brain to work in new sequences, new patterns, and new combinations, you're making a new mind. And the idea is to be able to not just apply information or knowledge to have a new experience once. It's to be able to retrain the body over and over again to be able to do it consistently. And that's when we replace old memories with new memories. That's when we upscale the brain's hardware and have the mind and body working together. And when we have the mind and body working together, the heart is open. And certainly there's enough room for that, I think, in our world today.
Okay. I'm going to take a break. And when we come back, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, what's the difference between our mind and our brain?
Okay.
Amongst others. Stay with us.